I still remember the sound. It wasn't exactly a single sound, but a strange mix that only those who have spent days inside a hospital can understand. Constant beeps from the monitors, hurried footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing, low voices of nurses trying to remain calm even when everything around them seemed urgent. But what stuck with me the most wasn't the sound. That was the phrase. "We did everything we could." The doctor said this while looking at my family. Not for me. I was in bed, connected to tubes and machines, conscious enough to understand, but too weak to react. My body felt heavy, as if it was no longer completely mine. Even my breathing felt like something I needed to wait for to happen. When I heard those words, there was no explosion of emotions. There was no immediate despair like in the movies. It was worse. It was silent. An inner silence that seemed to shut everything out around it. It was as if something inside me had understood, before my mind, that this was the end. My mother started to cry. But it wasn't a loud cry. It was a restrained cry, the kind that seems to come from such a deep place that it can't even come out forcefully. She held my hand with both of hers, as if that could stop what was being said. My father stood there, looking at the doctor as if there were still an alternative phrase, a second option, some hidden door that no one had seen. But there wasn't one. The doctor continued explaining in that technical tone doctors use when they need to say something impossible to soften. The infection spread rapidly. The body is no longer responding to antibiotics. We've already tried everything within our reach. Everything that was within our reach. That phrase kept echoing in my head. Because our reach has a limit. And at that moment, that limit had been reached. I couldn't move my body much, but I could hear. And hearing, at that moment, was worse than any physical pain. Because I understood. I understood what was happening without needing an explanation. He understood that medicine had reached its limit. And from then on, there was no more protocol. There was no plan anymore. There was no guarantee anymore. Just wait. I tried to say something. But my voice didn't come out as it should have. It was as if my throat had forgotten how to form words. And perhaps that was the most frightening thing, realizing that even the basics were failing. The doctor left the room after a while. And when he left, the atmosphere changed. Not because something physical has changed. But that's because the presence of technical hope had left along with him. And only the family remained. And the silence. My mother knelt beside the bed. I will never forget that image. She did not hesitate. He didn't ask if he could. He didn't try to be strong. She simply fell to her knees, holding my hand, and began to pray. I don't remember the exact words at the beginning. It was all mixed up with crying and broken breathing. But it was clear that it wasn't a beautiful or rehearsed prayer. It was a prayer of despair. Simple. Direct. Real. My father, after a few seconds, also knelt down. He wasn't one to show emotions easily. But at that moment he closed his eyes tightly, as if he had been holding something inside for a long time, and he also began to pray. And I stayed there. Attending. Weak. No reaction. Out of control. And for the first time in my life, I realized something that deeply bothered me. I had no strategy left. Not even a doctor. Not even emotional. Not even rational. Nothing. All that remained was what I had always treated with doubt or distance, faith. Even without knowing exactly what to believe, I thought, if there is anyone, now would be the time. But it wasn't a prayer. It was a lost thought. The monitor next to me continued to emit its regular sounds, as if it were telling me something I no longer understood. And that night, inside that room, two things were happening at the same time. Medicine had given up. And faith had begun to speak. After that conversation with the doctor, the hospital seemed to change its atmosphere. It wasn't something physical, it wasn't the air, it wasn't the environment itself. It was the perception. Everything became heavier, slower, more definitive. People kept walking, talking, working, but to me, it felt like I was in a different rhythm of the world. It's as if my life has entered some kind of silent countdown. My mother stayed by my side almost the entire time. She didn't talk much. Sometimes she would just hold my hand, sometimes she would just watch me in silence, as if she were trying to memorize every detail about me. My father was going back and forth from the hospital, taking care of practical matters, but I noticed that he had changed too. There was a different tension in his face, as if something he never wanted to face had finally surfaced without warning. The following days were a series of tests, medication adjustments, and attempts to stabilize something that was no longer responding as before. I heard snippets of conversations between nurses, no meaningful response, the signals are unstable. The situation remains serious. Loose words, but all pointing in the same direction. And with each new examination, the doctor's expressions grew more serious. Until one of them, the same doctor from the first conversation, returned to the room with a clipboard in his hand and a different expression. It wasn't exactly sadness. It was something more neutral. More technical. But at the same time, colder. He remained silent for a few seconds before speaking. We've already tried all viable alternatives. He looked at my family, then at me. The body is not responding as expected. My mother squeezed my hand tighter. I didn't need a translation. That was the limit. There was no more, let's try one more thing. There was no more, let's wait a little longer. It was simply an observation. And then came the
If you wish to deepen your knowledge of Jesus, the Gospels, and the Christian life, I have prepared a complete guide that can help you on your faith journey. In addition to the main guide, you will receive 3 special bonuses today. The ebook The Lost Parables, the Gospel Study Journal, and the guide The Hebrew Mindset. If you found this content helpful, click the first link in the description to learn more. I hope this material helps you further understand Christ's message and strengthen your spiritual journey.
Phrase that defined that entire phase. From now on, the focus is on comfort. Comfort. A beautiful word for something very difficult to accept. The doctor explained that they would do everything possible to avoid pain and maintain basic stability, but that there was no further effective curative intervention. When he left, the room looked different again. Quieter. More empty. But also more honest. My mother didn't say anything for a few minutes. Then she just got up, went to the window, and stood looking out. I could see her shoulders trembling slightly, but she wasn't crying loudly. She seemed to be struggling to keep from completely collapsing. That's when something unexpected happened. She came back to me, sat down beside the bed and said in a low voice, "I'm going to ask some people to pray for you." I wanted to reply. To say that it wasn't necessary. Or maybe it wouldn't change anything. But something inside me stopped me. It no longer had that old pride of before. It was something else. It was exhaustion. A profound weariness from fighting alone against something I didn't understand. So I just stayed silent. That night, the hospital seemed even emptier. The sounds from the hallways faded. The lights seemed colder. And I started to notice something strange happening inside me. It wasn't pain. It wasn't constant fear. It was a kind of waiting game. It was as if my own body was awaiting an outcome that had already been decided somewhere I couldn't see. And at the same time, for the first time since it all began, I couldn't stop thinking about my mother's prayer. Not in religion. Not in terms of concepts. But in it. The way she spoke to me without words. The way she held my hand, as if there was still hope even when no one else seemed to have it. And that started to bother me. Not as an intellectual idea. But like a feeling. Something I couldn't turn off. That night, I didn't sleep. And while the hospital continued its routine outside, something inside me began to change in an almost imperceptible way. It wasn't faith yet. But it was no longer just doubt. It was something in between. Something new. And I still didn't know what to do with it. In the third part of the story, the hospital no longer seemed like just a place for treatment. It had turned into a waiting area. Not a typical wait, like waiting for an improvement or test results. It was something else. A quieter, heavier weight, almost as if everyone around knew they were just witnessing what was already happening. The doctors continued to come, but less frequently. The conversations were short. Objective. No promises. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to have completely changed the way she lived those days. She no longer spent time just waiting for news. She spent time praying. Not just by my side, but also outside the bedroom. I later found out that she met with other people in the hallway, people I didn't even know, and they prayed together for me. At first, I didn't understand it. To me, it seemed like just an emotional gesture. Something people do when they don't know what else to do. But something about it started to bother me. It wasn't noise. It was the opposite. It was the consistency. Every day. At the same time. As if that prayer had its own rhythm, independent of what the doctor said. My body remained weak. There were still bouts of fever, moments of instability, moments when everything seemed to worsen without warning. But along with that, something strange began to happen. Minor changes. Almost imperceptible. A slightly better examination. A reading that didn't get worse as expected. A brief period of stability where there had previously been constant decline. The doctors didn't call it a miracle. They called it a partial response. Fluctuation of the framework. Natural instability of evolution. But for my mother, that was different. She saw it as a sign. And he continued praying with even greater intensity. Until one day, something more serious happened. I remember seeing 3 people entering the room with my mother. They weren't doctors. They were people from her church. They stayed close to my bed. And they began to pray. This time, it wasn't a silent prayer. It was a stronger prayer, more direct, more charged with emotion. I remember hearing my name repeatedly. I remember words like healing, restoration, and life. And I remember, above all, something that disconcerted me: no one there spoke as if it were too late. This hit me in a strange way. Because the entire medical environment around me talked about limits, stability, palliative care, and pain control. But those people spoke as if there was still a way forward. As if there were still a possibility. And I, in the midst of all this, was torn. A part of me still trusted the numbers, the tests, the reports. Another part began to hear that prayer in a different way. Not as a promise, but as an insistence. It was as if they were knocking on a door that no one else dared to try anymore. That night, after they left, my mother stayed with me. The room was silent. And she began to pray again. Alone. Low. Without drawing attention. And it was at that moment that something inside me changed for the first time in a clearer way. I don't know exactly how to explain it. But I didn't want to interrupt. I didn't want to question it. I just listened. And while she was praying, I began to think about everything that had been said up to that point. No longer responding, there is no alternative, focus on comfort, limit reached, and at the same time, something inside me was responding to that differently now. Not as a negation. But that's a question. A different kind of question. Not about medicine. But as for whether that was really the end of everything. And that doubt began to grow silently. Without fanfare. Without excessive emotion. Just like a small opening where before there was certainty of the end. My mother finished her prayer and stood silently.
If you wish to deepen your knowledge of Jesus, the Gospels, and the Christian life, I have prepared a complete guide that can help you on your faith journey. In addition to the main guide, you will receive 3 special bonuses today. The ebook The Lost Parables, the Gospel Study Journal, and the guide The Hebrew Mindset. If you found this content helpful, click the first link in the description to learn more. I hope this material helps you further understand Christ's message and strengthen your spiritual journey.
Beside me. After a few minutes, she said something quietly. I feel like it's not over yet. I didn't answer. But for the first time, I didn't automatically think, this doesn't make sense. I just considered it. And that was already different from anything that had existed before. Because inside me, something that seemed closed off began to move. Slowly. Almost invisible. But it's real. The last night before the move seemed like all the others. Same cold lights. Even distant sounds from the hallways. Same feeling of waiting inside the room. But inside me, something was no longer the same. I couldn't explain exactly when it started, but there was a difference in how I saw everything around me. Before, I just put up with it. Now, I observed. I paid attention to small details that previously meant nothing. The way my mother breathed beside me. The silence between one visit and the next. The interval between beeps from the monitor. Everything seemed to have a different weight. That night, my mother didn't leave. She sat beside me, holding my hand, in silence for long periods. At times, she would simply close her eyes and pray softly. At other times, she would just look at me as if trying to keep something inside. And it was in that silence that it happened. In the middle of the night, a doctor rushed into the room. It wasn't the same one who usually saw me. He checked the equipment, looked at the results on the monitor, and frowned. He called a nurse. Then another one. I immediately noticed that something was different. My mother got up from her chair. "What happened?" she asked. The doctor took a few seconds to respond. "The signs are improving." She didn't understand at first. "Like this?" He looked at the data again, as if trying to confirm something that didn't make sense. The inflammatory response decreased significantly, and vital parameters stabilized. Silence. I didn't fully understand what that meant in medical terms, but the reaction around me spoke volumes. The nurse checked again. The doctor ordered another test immediately. Everything seemed sudden. It's confusing. And it's outside the expected norm. My mother put her hand to her mouth. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't cry in despair. She cried about something else. Hope. In the following hours, more tests were performed. More reviews. More conferences. And the word began to appear in the hallway, whispered among the professionals, inexplicable. Nobody wanted to use another word. But that's what it seemed to be. Inexplicable. I was still weak, not yet cured, there was still a road to recovery ahead. But something essential had changed. The body began to respond. Slowly. But consistently. The doctor returned to the room later. This time, his tone wasn't the same as before. He remained silent for a few seconds before speaking. "We don't have a clear explanation for this evolution," he said. "But the tests show a real and consistent improvement." He looked at my mother. Then for me. And he added, "We'll continue monitoring, but this changes the prognosis." My mother didn't say anything. She simply closed her eyes for a moment. And I saw exactly what was happening inside her. It was no surprise. It was confirmation. In the following days, the improvement continued. Slow. But it continues. The number of devices was gradually reduced. His breathing became more stable. The fever disappeared. And gradually, I began to emerge from that state of limitation. Not magically. Not instantly. But it's like crossing a line that previously seemed impossible to cross. When they finally told me I could go home, I didn't know exactly how to feel. The doctor called it an unexpected recovery. My mother called it an answer. I didn't know what to call it yet. But I remembered everything. From the phrase, "We did nothing more that could have been done." From the prayer on the hospital floor. From the silence that followed the medical decision to give up. And the change that came after. As we left the hospital, my mother held my hand, just like she did on the first day. But now it was different. It was no longer a desperate hand. It was a gesture of gratitude. And as I walked out the door, I looked back one last time. And for the first time, I didn't just see a hospital. I saw a place where something had been closed off, and something had been rewritten. And I understood, even though I couldn't fully explain it, when the doctors reached their limit. The prayer did not come to an end. She continued. And everything changed.